Hi everyone, Nadine Briggs here from Simply Social Kids. I wanted to talk to you today about one potential reason why perhaps your kids' grades dropped this year, during the pandemic. So the pandemic brought on unexpected challenges for all of us, obviously, kids especially in some ways where they had to make so many changes in terms of going to completely remote learning. Maybe they were in a hybrid learning, so their schedule was changing where they were sometimes in person, sometimes they were online, then eventually maybe they went all back online. And that was a lot of transitioning back and forth. And it was really taxing for them in many, many ways. And so the academic performance for a lot of the kids was lower during COVID than it had been in previous years. And obviously, our kids weren't less smart during COVID. So what was going on during that time? Kids really worried and fretted over the fact that their grades were lowered. And sometimes they were telling me that they were failing all their classes, or maybe they got their first F or their first D, and they were super stressed out about it. They really felt badly. And they felt like they were working hard, they were really trying, but they just weren't able to get the grades that they were able to get prior to the pandemic. And on top of that, parents not really understanding what's going on are encouraging their kids to get better grades. Maybe they're doing it in loud voices, really wanting them to do well because it's school and we all want our children to do well in school. So there was just a lot going on around this particular issue. And so what I wanted to talk to you about today, if you aren't previously aware, that a lot of the kids that we work with, a lot of kids with social difficulties also have some difficulty with their executive functioning. And it's because it lives in the same part of the brain. So essentially, executive functioning is where your intellect and your ability to act on that intellect, there's a little bit of a disconnect there. So I'm going to give you the Webster's version of executive functioning, just so you know what I'm talking about. And we'll talk about how that impacts them academically and also socially. So the Webster's definition is executive functioning is a group of complex mental processes and cognitive abilities that's including working memory, impulse control, and inhibition and reasoning, and control the skills such as organizing tasks, remembering things, managing their time, and problem solving. It's all required for this goal directed behavior, which is what school is, right? They need to get things done. They need to manage their time, all of these things in order to be able to finish assignments on time, be prepared for tests, finish projects, and all that sort of stuff. That executive functioning comes into play. That is a challenge for kids, and it was particularly taxed during the pandemic. So think about the way that they had to change how they do school, right? If they were in person, maybe things were written on the board and they could look at it there. And maybe their buddy next to them would tell them when the thing was due, or they could talk to them or watch what other people were doing. They could ask questions of their peers. They could ask questions of the teacher more easily. But when everything moved online, all of that changed in terms of how they were able to interact with their peers and their teachers, and the way that they had to do their work and how they had to submit their work. All of that was very different for them. And like I said, some people went fully remote, then they went hybrid. So some days it was one way, some days it was another way. And if you already have difficulty kind of organizing your thoughts in your mind and getting things done, that was just like an implosion for them, right? They just couldn't get that done. And a lot of people saw it reflected in their grades. If not understanding this, if parents are not understanding that this could be an executive functioning challenge, they're going to think, understandably, that this is laziness, they're not motivated, they're not working hard, they're not trying hard enough, all those things, right? And so you can see where the lower grades plus some feedback from parents that, for parents that unknowingly just didn't understand what was kind of going on here, that can really take a hit to their self-esteem, right? Because they're doing their best, they're managing the situation the best they can. Everyone's frustrated. So it was just a really, really tough time. And of course, the grades suffered through all of that. So what do we do about it? So I have just 4 tips for you in terms of this. The first tip is just reassure them that this year's grades do not reflect their actual intelligence. They are not less smart during the pandemic than they were prior to the pandemic. It was other factors that were at play here. They were really doing their best being thrown into very unfamiliar territory. So that's number one. As parents, keep in mind that one, not so great academic year is not going to make or break their lives. It's a long journey, and a lot of kids are in the same situation. So even if they were behind or they failed something, it's not going to make or break their entire careers. So it's hard when you're in the thick of it to think of it that way, but we're on a real long journey here. And so one year is not going to make that big of a difference. If you're concerned about your child's ability to manage their time and their tasks, their projects, and they do have this executive functioning challenge, I would strongly recommend that maybe it got highlighted during the pandemic, but it's always going to be there even after the pandemic, to educate yourself on executive functioning strategies, or even better yet, honestly, hire an executive functioning coach. Because a lot of kids really need a lot of strategies. And as a parent, you might study up on it. You might not have all the strategies that you can provide kids by not being an expert in it, but they need a lot of strategies because they need to find out the ones that work for them. And it's a very individualized thing. The other thing around this particular issue is that a lot of kids know that they're struggling, they know that they're having problems, but when parents come in to try to help, a lot of times they get really angry at that parent, even though they know they need the help, they know they're not doing well on their own, but yet they get really angry with that parent. So that can cause a lot of problems. So if you have an executive functioning coach, then that person can be the person who intervenes and helps them, so you're not having all that arguing within the family. Kids will say to me, they don't even know why they get mad at their parents. They just do. There's just something about them intervening in this particular area that makes them upset. Also, just something to keep in mind is their anxiety goes way up. So as they get behind in assignments, you would think they would just hunker down and get those assignments done and catch up. But what happens is they start to get really anxious because they're getting more and more and more behind. And before you know it, they're like 18 assignments behind. And then they feel like, I can't get this done. And they're even more and more overwhelmed and unable to really use that executive functioning that they need to get that done. So it is important that we kind of nip it in the bud so that they have strategies to help them get through it so that they don't get that overwhelmed by getting behind. So keep in mind too that these skills also come into play when they're scheduling social time. So a lot of parents will call me and say, oh, my kid has a few friends at school, but don't ever get together outside of school. Part of the reason for that might be that they just don't know how to plan it. Believe it or not, getting together, scheduling an outing, planning time with somebody involves those same executive functioning skills. So if your child or your teen is not able to do that, and certainly parents start to back off on that as for teenagers, right? We want them to be able to schedule their own social time and not be their social director when they're getting older. But they might need some help in terms of how to do that and how to schedule an outing, because that does also cause anxiety for them if there's a lot of things to plan and they don't know how to do it, and they don't know who's available when, they don't know how they're going to get there. There's a lot of things that come into play, and that can overwhelm them, and therefore they just don't even do it because it's too overwhelming. So keep that in mind. If your child is not socializing or your teen, that could be why. So in closing, just a reminder, this is not that they're lazy, they're not irresponsible, unintelligent. They lack the organizational skills to act on that intellect. And that is in part what might have caused grades to be down this year, or even kids to fail certain courses they never would have failed before. So I hope you found this helpful. If you did, please hit the like button and hit subscribe to hear more from us. Thanks for listening.